Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Addicted to Crime podcast. I'm your host, Shelby. I hope you're doing well. I hope you have fully dived into this enchanting, crisp autumn aura that is October. It's that time of year, folks. It's Halloween, Hallowmas, All Saints Day, All Hallows Eve. Whatever you call it, the vibe is the same. A spooky, scary time where you can relax, chill, finally get out of that hot summer and put a sweatshirt on, chill by the bonfire, go to an orchard, drink apple cider, go on a hayride, whatever you do to celebrate fall. Yes, it's finally here. I'm so thankful it's finally here. For the next few weeks, I want to cover crimes that happened on or around Halloween. So that's what we have here. Some days I'll cover one, some days I'll cover a couple because, surprise, surprise, unfortunately, there are a number of cases that happened on or around spooky season. I'm covering 2 Halloween cases today. This first case, it's in particularly very, very insane. A very twisted case of passion, scandal, and a mystery that will leave us wondering if this case is all tied up in a pretty bow or not. The second case is thought to have been solved for 40 years before getting reopened in 2020. You're going to be in for a crazy ride this episode. Let's do this, guys. Let's dive in. Now, if you hadn't had a chance to check out my Addicted to Crime shorts that I have been releasing, go check those out. They're really cool. This week, I'm going to be covering the real-life Michael Myers, the guy who inspired, all the Halloweens, and I want you to check that out. The episode's super cool. I talk about whether he's a real person or whether he's based on urban legends. Again, it's a super short episode, not a deep dive like these, but just some quick coverings of cases. You can find those on my Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, basically anything. You can put a video on it. That's where it is. So go ahead, watch those. Show your love. I'd appreciate it. So something kind of awesome happened this week. It's true crime related, and it's super awesome, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So I covered the case of Catherine Renee Good a few months ago. She was a 2-year-old little girl who was sadly murdered by her own father. He squeezed her to death. And in the case that I shared with you, I kind of went into the entire investigation, how so many different people in that case stepped up and wouldn't let the case die. And it's just a super, super it's a heartbreaking episode. But when you hear about the resilience of the family members of this little girl Renee, it'll just warm your heart. It's a very, very heartwarming story as well. Now, in this case, I really go through the timeline of events. I kind of go through one of the books that I read that was my sources, and then I take you to the end where Shane Good, Renee Good's father, finally confesses in prison by way of a letter to Renee's mother, Annette. Now, a woman reached out to me recently. She found the episode that I did on Renee, and she reached out to me via the Facebook page, and she was super, super amazing. Her name is Michelle, and she is Renee's sister. She said that she appreciated how I shared her sister's case, basically just saying, thank you for keeping it alive. And oh my goodness, I have chills like talking about it right now, but it was just so amazing for me to hear from her. It was just so amazing hearing from a family member of someone whose case I covered. Like, Michelle was amazing. She was so, so sweet. She proceeded to give me some more resources that I could share with you guys that I'm going to do soon. She also shared some updates about some of the people in the case that I talked about. And her and I are talking right now about her possibly coming on a future episode as a guest. So we'll see if that works out. I really hope it does, because I just want to pick her brain about so many things. She's such a amazing individual. And I just want to go over the case again briefly with her and then share those updates about her family with you guys. It's so amazing. And if her and I don't have a chance to do that, then I definitely will come back on here and share an update with you just as an extra. But I'm really hoping that her and I can work it out to get her on here, because she has such wisdom that I want her to share with you guys, especially about domestic violence and about recovery in this situation. It's an extremely delicate matter, and I just really think that it's going to be important to you guys as just something that you need to know, something you need to take home with you. Now, I'm gonna hold off, like I said, on giving those updates, right now, because I really want her to share them with you herself. But I just had to share, with you guys as this was going on. It still blows my mind when I connect with family members of victims, and it just really puts like what I'm doing into perspective. Like, you guys, reaching out and talking with families like this, that's the true reason true crime podcasts should exist. That should be one of the main reasons we are here doing the thing every day. As true crime podcast hosts, we're sharing these terrible stories with you guys as the listeners. Our goals should be to help the family. Our goals should be to connect with the family. Our goals should be to share what they want us to share, to see if we can share anything on their behalf, get their side of the situation, take the time to actually listen to them, and offer to do whatever we can to help them as they're going through this. And that's why I do this. Every time someone reaches out to me, like Michelle did, and like one of the ladies that I did, Pamela, a couple months ago, earlier, about her missing daughter, LaQuanta, I just get shivers, because it just cements in my mind that I'm doing what I need to be doing. I want to make the teeniest, tiniest, even sliver of a difference for these women, for these missing individuals. And I just want to do something to help them. And it just touched me. And I know I kind of went off a little bit, but I just had to share with you guys that went on. And I also thought it was important to mention, especially on this specific episode, because, guys, oftentimes when horrible crimes take place on holidays, that crime, especially through the media, tends to be fantasized or exaggerated just to get more publicity, kind of more of a shock value because of the holiday. It becomes less about the victims and more about the when and the how. And I do not appreciate that at all. It really irks me. I think it's very disrespectful to the victims, to the families, to everyone involved, and it's just a slap in the face to them. So I know this episode is going to be spooky. It's going to get you in the mood to talk about a horrifying true crime case in the month of Halloween. And I get that too. I get it. But just remember, these people are people. They have families. They matter. We have to tell their story. It's not just a scary story. It's a true crime case. All right, that's enough of me chatting on about this. Let's finally get into it. We're going to begin this story by talking about the night of the murder. It's Halloween night in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, California. The year is 1957, and Peter and Betty Fabiano had spent the evening with a big bowl of candy by their front door. The porch light on, and they were greeting all of the trick-or-treaters that were stopping by. They were a very friendly couple, a very young couple, and they had a lot of kids stopping by for treats. Finally, the crowd of kids began to dwindle as it got later and later, and around 10 p.m. that night, Betty and Peter laid down to bed. At 11 o'clock, Peter was awakened by a knock at their door. He thought to himself, it's pretty strange. It's late. There really shouldn't be any more trick-or-treaters out right now. That's kind of weird, but he got up out of bed. He went to the front door. He grabbed the bowl of candy and opened the door. Standing at the door was an oddly tall, much taller than the kids who were previously there. And this person was described as, quote, a grotesque, garishly painted face with a domino mask and men's clothing, blue jeans, a khaki jacket, and red gloves, end quote. Peter asked the stranger, quote, it's a little late for this, isn't it? end quote. According to the article, the person held up a paper bag that was concealing a gun and replied, "No." The person then shot Peter very precisely in the chest, and the force of the shot and the close range pushed him back on the floor on his back. Betty would later say that she heard sounds coming from the front door that seemed to be from a very, very deep voice, and it wasn't Peter's voice. The deep voice was followed by a loud pop of a gunshot. The sounds that she heard were pop, thud, and screech of the tires as a vehicle sped away. She bolted out of bed completely terrified, and her daughter Judy was also awoken, and they found Peter lying in a pool of his own blood by the open front door. He had been shot in the chest. Judy ran to the neighbor's house next door to let them know what was going on, and coincidentally this neighbor happened to be a police officer, and they phoned 911 to report the shooting and to get Peter some help. Peter was sent to the Sun Valley Hospital, where he sadly succumbed to his wounds on the way there and died. He died from a single gunshot wound to the chest by a .38 caliber bullet that had lodged in his chest. Now, let's real quick back up and see if we can get some background on Peter and Betty Fabiano. Betty had 2 children who were teenagers from a previous marriage. She was drop-dead gorgeous with red hair, a stunning smile, and a beautiful physique. She was absolutely stunning. She was 36 years old around the time of this shooting and around the time of Peter's death. Now, Peter was a veteran. He had served in World War II as a Marine, and now he was working as a very successful hairstylist. He had many successful beauty salons in his name, and he was also very good looking as well. Both him and Betty were a very dynamic, good-looking couple, and it was reported that Peter was Betty's hairdresser and kept her looking sleek 24/7. They were living in a home in Sun Valley, California, in Los Angeles at this time, and if you're not sure where that area is, it's about a half hour from Beverly Hills, California, and West Hollywood, and only about 5 miles from Burbank, California, so you can kind of count and figure out where that is. It's a very busy, a very populated part of California, even in the 1950s. Now, when police started investigating this scene, they were surprised to find no bullet casings, meaning the killer probably picked up the bullet casing before leaving the scene. They also didn't find any other evidence there, and they didn't find anything missing from the home. And this stuck out as odd right away. It seemed very planned to officers and very deliberate. And it's also odd because Peter Fabiano was a very successful man, and his house had a lot of valuables in there. The entire thing seemed very, very personal. When they were canvassing the neighborhood, seeing if anyone saw anything that could possibly help the investigation, police talked to a witness who described the person who went up to that door at 11 that night. And that's when the witness described the individual to the officers and told them what she heard Peter say and what she heard the killer's response of no. Now, when they were questioning those who knew Peter Fabiano, they started speaking with a woman named Joan Rabel. She knew the couple because she had worked for Peter Fabiano in one of his salons for a short time period, and she told police she considered herself a friend of Peter and Betty. She told police that they were, quote, 2 of my closest friends, end quote. Now let's talk a little bit about Joan Rabel. Joan Rabel was a woman in her 40s. She did some work as a freelance photographer when she worked for Peter Fabiano in his salon, and she had been recently divorced. Betty and Joan's relationship grew close at one point when Peter and Betty began having some marital issues. They were having some fights. It would break out in the middle of the night, short tempers and stuff like that. And after a while, they finally agreed to a time of separation to try and just repair their marriage. Peter stayed at the family home while Betty went to live with her friend Joan Rabel. They became closer and closer friends at this time, and it's even thought that the relationship was more than platonic and that there was more going on. Peter repeatedly picked up on this and felt very uncomfortable with his wife spending so much time with Joan. And when he and Betty reconciled later when they got back together, he reportedly told Betty not to spend any more time with Joan. He told her not to let Joan come over anymore. He said don't hang out with her. Basically,